Installing the handrails is a two-person procedure. Carefully open and unpack the rail crate. Using a hammer and pry bar works well. Place the curved rail on each side of the stand. The rails are marked for left and right, as viewed when facing the pool. The straight rails are interchangeable and may be placed on top of the diving board, with the labels on each handrail indicating which end should be positioned nearest the ladder. There is a slight bend at this end of the rail to facilitate alignment with the curved rail. Lay out 11 rail clamps. Arrange the bolts on the diving board, grouped by length. With 2 people holding the curved rail, slide 4 rail clamps over the straight end. Use care when sliding rail clamps onto the rail to avoid scratching. Hold the rail in place at the top of each rail support using one-handed bar clamps. Line up the threads in the rail clamp with the mounting holes in the rail support. Inserting a taper punch or Phillips screwdriver will help to align the clamp. Using the shortest bolt possible, loosely attach the rail clamps. Position the curved end of the rail so that the center line of the rail is lined up with the 2 mounting holes on the rail socket of the ladder. Tighten the rail clamp bolts enough to hold the rail against the rail support, but loose enough to allow rotation of the rail. Rotate the rail so it's against the outside of the ladder. Hold the rail against the mounting holes and insert a fine point marker through the bottom mounting hole and make a mark on the rail. Rotate the rail away from the ladder and mark a line 3/4 of an inch below the previous mark. Using a tubing cutter, cut the rail off at this line. Use a file to remove burrs from the end and inside of the rail. Position the rail so the end is inside the ladder. Slide 1 rail clamp over the end of the rail and past the curves. This clamp will be used to attach the straight rail to the curved rail. Slide 2 rail clamps over the end of the rail. Use these clamps to secure the rail to the ladder rail socket. It may be helpful to loosen the other rail clamps to allow the rail end to fully seat into the socket. Use a one-handed bar clamp to pull the handrail end as far as possible into the socket. Insert the shortest bolts that will engage the threads and tighten them. The bolts used up to this point tighten the clamp around the rail and will most likely be too long and will bottom out. Once seated, these bolts should be removed one at a time and replaced with the shortest bolts possible. Use this procedure for all rail clamp bolts. Tighten all rail clamp bolts, starting from the ladder and working forward. Ensure that all bolt heads are tight against the surface of the rail supports and ladder. If not, replace them with the next shorter bolt. Slide 4 rail clamps over the straight rail. Using an assistant or one-handed bar clamp, hold the rail in position and start a bolt in each rail clamp. Slide the straight rail into position so that it is nearly touching the curved rail. Tighten the bolts enough to hold the rail against the support arm, but loose enough to allow rotation of the rail. The straight rail has a slight bend approximately 44 inches from the ladder end. Rotate the rail until the end lines up with the curved rail and with the bent side down. Tighten the straight rail clamp bolts. Slide the remaining rail clamp down the curved rail until it's below the straight rail. Then, slide the straight rail clamp along the rail toward the ladder. Join the 2 rails with the bronze rail bracket. Repeat the process for the opposite side handrails. Check all bolts for tightness. Remove any masking tape used in the installation process.